Hey y'all, my name is Daphne Hoffacker. I'm the advocacy chair for the Austin Council of PTAs. I'm here this evening with Mario Pina from Raise Your Hand, Texas. He's here to talk about the state of school funding in Texas. As most of you know, we are PTA, we are an advocacy organization, and we are very focused on school funding right now. And so we're bringing in people who know even more than we do. And at this point, we've been doing it for a long time, and I feel like we know a lot. We know too much, people. We're bringing in experts to help educate y'all leading up to Rally Day, which is kind of supposed to be our kickoff off to the legislative session. But this year is a little different, and they started the hearings and the public aspect of the legislative session earlier than we expected. But we're going to be ready. So Mario is here to help us know what we need to know to be effective advocates at the Capitol. We're going to put some links in the chat that include links to information about our Rally Day and also our house open house, which is a school holiday, and I hope you all can bring your kids to that. But I don't want to take up time talking about that. I want Mario to talk about school funding. By the way, Mario is bilingual. So if that would be helpful for anybody to have some interpretation along the way from him, just reach out. I think that's not going to happen on this group, but it's available to you. So if you feel more comfortable asking him a question in Spanish, he can help you out.
Good evening, everybody. I'm seeing some familiar faces and names on here. Super excited to talk to you guys. Daphne, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm going to go ahead and, can I get access to share my screen? So as I go through this presentation, I'm going to preface it with, it is a lot of information. A lot has gone on, especially since this past weekend. There's going to be a lot of information. It'll be a lot from reading slides because there's so much information. If there's a question, please feel free to jump in and ask it, and I'll try to answer as best as my ability. Some of the information on here is very new, as you guys know. And so we're still kind of working through some of the details, but I'm going to try to give you all as much as I can. And let me see if this is, perfect. And can you guys see that? Thumbs up. Yes. Thank you, Laurie. All right. So my name is Mario Pina. I'm with Raise Your Hand, Texas. I'm the regional advocacy director for the greater Austin area. If you don't know how far that is, my region covers about 13 House districts across the state. It goes as far north as about Jarrow and as far south as New Braunfels, and then from east to west from about Bastrop. And then I have kind of a wonky west side. I go as far as like Bernie, Fredericksburg. I've added a little bit more to my region over the last like year and a half. So I am in quite a few House districts now, but it just means I'm getting to work with a lot more school districts. There's a lot of advocates across state. I don't have to tell this group because I know how active ACPTA is. You are not alone. Lots of people are fighting for education. And I know sometimes it feels like we're alone, but we are not. So just kind of the basic, I always like to start with, if you don't know Raise Your Hand Texas, our mission is to educate, engage, and activate Texans. And Texans through public education and policy and advocacy. And I think you made me a co-host, Daphne. Okay, I'm just making sure that I'll try to let people in as they pop up. Someone just popped up on my screen, but just in case if somebody else has eyes on that as well.
Yeah, we have somebody who's got eyes on
Okay,
us.
perfect.
We get you covered.
So we're just gonna jump into the nitty-gritty. As you guys know, we just had our state of address recently with Governor Abbott. He's talked about some of his emergency items. Number one, property tax release of at least 10 billion. He's been talking about this for a few sessions now. We've been looking for some kind of property tax release. Still kind of waiting on it. He talked about a Texas-size investments in water infrastructure. Teacher pay raise, as you guys know, we went through several special sessions last legislative session with teacher pay as one of the things that they were talking about. Unfortunately, nothing was passed during during the regular session last time, and nothing was passed during those special sessions, largely because of the the tying of a voucher or educational savings account system. And a lot of Texans felt like this wasn't worth the trade-off. And so not a lot was done. A lot of people call that holding the money hostage. And that's kind of what we've seen. And we're still looking at that right now. He's talked about expanding career training, really focusing on like CTE courses. What are those non-traditional pathways? How are we training students to go out into the workforce immediately after they graduate high school if they're not going through a traditional four-year program? Of course, school choice is probably the big one when it comes to public education. We'll kind of get a little bit more into that later on. He's talked about bail reform and the Texas Cyber Command. Um, if you're not super versed within like the legislative session, it's important to remember that during the first 60 days of a regular session, they're not allowed to pass any legislation. They can't vote on it. They can't go through it unless it's an emergency item declared by the governor. So what's on here is something that could be heard and will be heard probably in the next few weeks, if not in the next week on some of these. So just know that that's why it was really important for him to say, these are my emergency action items so they can get through it quickly and not kind of wait. And this session 60-day mark is March 14th. So as you can see, we just started and they're trying to push some of this stuff right now. Oops, let's make sure. So let's talk about the governor's teacher pay recommendations. He has talked about increasing teacher pay directly through a direct appropriation in teacher pay and other compensation strategies. He talked about quite a bit of investment in TIA, sorry, the teacher incentive allotment, which, if you don't know, allows teachers to kind of get into the program if they meet certain qualifications, and it gives them more competitive pay increase opportunities based off of STAR scores and for Austin ISD, PPFT, or T-test in other school districts. And a lot of people are saying, great, yeah, let's make this merit-based. The problem is the way TIA currently runs, not every school district is enrolled in these programs. And even districts that are enrolled in these programs, not every teacher is able to be in it. So there is a budget for this. So as of now, there is not a way for every teacher in the state to opt into this program, which kind of really pits teachers against each other. And so, there's a lot of concern around how do we make sure that we're equitable? How do we make sure that, teachers that are in some of our really disadvantaged schools, how do we make sure that those amazing teachers are also getting a piece of the pie? And so that's something to think about as we look at that. He wants to invest.
I'm sorry, Mario. I was wondering what percentage of teachers get this right now or
That
qualify for this. It's a small number, right?
it is a very small number. Yes.
3%.
Yeah, it was very low. Definitely not even close to half. And again, not every school district is going through this process, which is also difficult. He is looking at a $750 million investment within 2026, 2027. With that TIA, he's also talked about waiving fees for certifications. If you don't know, I was a prior teacher for 9 years with Austin ISD before I got into this role 2.5 years ago. I hold a certification in EC through 6, Gen Ed, Bilingual Ed, and 4 through 8 Core. And I took 5 tests in total, I think. And each one of those tests is about $120. So that's significant, and not all teachers pass it on their first time around. But I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think that that's how we're going to retain teachers. I don't think that's how we're going to recruit teachers. He wants to help mitigate costs for districts to hire retired teachers. Right now, there is a little cool period between the time that you retire and the time that you're able to be rehired. And so I know they've talked about waiving that as well. I didn't hear anything specifically right now, but that is something to think about. He wants to invest in high quality teacher preparation pathways, including residence, apprenticeships, and grow your own. We do already have quite a few school districts, including Austin ISD, who are already starting to kind of grow your own and giving students the opportunity to make that kind of their field of study in high school. They want to increase the mentor program allotment. Right now, there is statute that teachers should be getting some kind of mentorship program. It is not fully funded. It's not funded. I actually wrote a policy brief years ago, specifically talking about teacher mentorship programs. And this not raise your hand Texas stuff, but Mario stuff, the data that I saw and that I read showed that, teachers that have a mentor within their first 2 to 3 years um, have a significantly longer teacher life, right? And they're just much more prepared. So it's really important that we have those teacher programs for our novice teachers. Fund a statewide marketing campaign to recruit more teachers to the profession through high quality pathways. We'll kind of talk about what some teachers say would keep them in or would make them come into the field. And he wants to collect data regarding retention and recruitment, including the classifications, grade level, subject areas, duration, other relative data relating to vacancies and teaching positions, and create a job board to address these vacancies. We're seeing vacancies in almost every school district. I don't think there's one district, and I work with about 60 school districts within our area. I don't think I have one district that doesn't have any vacancies, and a lot of them have quite a few.
Mario, could I ask a question real quick?
Absolutely.
It's my understanding that a lot of school districts are recruiting people from outside of the country, recruiting teachers from outside the US.
Mhm.
It kind of makes one wonder, well, what will Donald Trump do about that? In a crazy way.
Yeah.
So can you speak to that? Is that really a pretty high proportion of teacher hires are coming from out of the country?
Um, I'll speak to you as Mario, not as raise your hand Texas on that. And this is more
Okay.
of an opinion rather than, saying this is what it is. I will say that, in my experience, especially like in Austin ISD, we did have and continue to have a high number of like bilingual teachers that are coming from other countries. Bilingual needs are high within Texas, and there's just not enough of us that are certified. We had quite a few. We have a really big exchange program with the Spaniard exchange program. And I know that a few years ago, Austin IC had something similar. They were going to do it in Mexico, and then I remember something happened to where it didn't quite get picked up, or it wasn't lifted off the ground the way they wanted it to. Um, so I anticipate that that's definitely going to cause some strains on education, especially again for our vulnerable students who English may not be their first language. But yeah, again, that's Mario, not raise your hand Texas talking.
Okay.
Mario, Mario,
Yes.
I don't know if you can see me. I undid the video, but my name's Judith. I'm in Austin now, but I worked in Dallas ISD. I lived in Dallas for all my life, pretty much until a few years ago. And I have two questions.
Okay.
One, yes, Dallas ISD, at least I've been retired now for about 8 years, but Dallas ISD had a lot of bilingual teachers and other teachers from many different countries.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one, to go along with his question. Number two, I'm concerned about the certification. You mentioned waiving the fees and so forth, but I'm concerned for two reasons. One, from what I understand, and we saw this in this Houston scandal, a lot of the teachers in public schools right now are not certified. Second question, or part of that question, is unless it's changed since I retired, private schools do not have to have certified teachers or librarians. I was also a librarian, and like you, I passed 4 or 5 state certification tests.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you, we'll hold off on the answer for certified teachers, because it is part of my presentation later. That way we can kind of loop back into that. And then, yeah, private schools, I think that's one of the things, and we'll kind of talk about that when we talk a little bit about the voucher and educational savings accounts. They as of now, they do not have to have certified teachers. We'll also kind of touch back on that when I get to that slide, but I appreciate the questions. And if I don't talk about it, please interrupt me again and remind me, because
Okay.
So governor career training recommendations. He wants to expand high demand career training programs by increasing funding for jobs and education for Texas grant programs. So again, looking at those early college, high schools, dual credits, those kind of trade partnerships that a lot of school districts are doing with their communities. He wants to increase funding for Rural Pathways Excellence Partnership Program to support rural districts. I will say a lot of my rural districts, and even some that are not so rural, some of our, right next door neighbors in Austin are having some issues finding people who are going to be able to teach these programs, or having issues investing in the school district to be able to train some of these people. So that is something that he's looking at. He wants to provide career and technical education funding for students enrolled in JROTC programs, improve career advising, and provide funding for career readiness assessments to ensure students are recommended courses best aligned with their career goals, and invest in strategies to ensure students enter high school proficient in math and prepare to excel in career aligned courses, which, all sounds great. We just got to make sure that we get teacher voice in there. We have to make sure that we're listening to our school districts, so that they're telling what they need, and that's being provided. Governor school choice recommendations. He wants to establish ESA accounts for kind of an all universal eligibility for all Texas school children, and appropriated $1 billion for the program for parents to choose the programs that will best fit their needs. He wants to ensure participation is widely voluntary for families and schools, and he wants to increase public school choice opportunities by increasing funding for open enrollment charter school facilities, expanding virtual education options, and improving access to intra-district transfers. This is not my only slide on this. We'll have like a little section that kind of expands on this. So if you have a question, just bear with me for a minute. And then, of course, aside from that, we have Lieutenant Governor Patrick's priority bills. These are the lists that are education related. Of course, Senate Bill 2, which we heard about last week, that provides school choice. Senate Bill 10 is about placing the 10 Commandments in schools, which we have seen kind of already take place. And we're seeing some pushback, and we'll continue to see that. Senate Bill 11, protecting the freedom to pray in school. Senate Bill 12, establishing a parental bill of rights in public education, which we're still trying to gather information of what that looks like. Senate Bill 13, guarding against appropriate books in school. We've heard book bans. We've heard a lot of arguments on what's appropriate, what should be in schools. So that'll be a really interesting one to kind of watch. And then Senate Bill 24, which is educating Texas students on the horrors of communism, which I thought was a really interesting one, that there's a specific bill for that. Just some things to know about the Committee for Senate Education. It was reduced from 13 members from last legislative session to 11 members this session. The two people that we really need to highlight are that chair and vice chair, Brian Creighton and Donna Campbell. Donna Campbell is, right in our backyards. And so we really need to apply, make sure you're calling representatives, make sure that you are writing to them, because we're going to be in a different space this legislative session. Some of the people who are no longer on the committee, Springer retired, and I haven't quite figured out how to say his name, Hagenbuck. We were having a debate about this yesterday when I was with some of my coworkers. And then Lamantia was defeated and had a Hinojosa win. Flores is just no longer on the committee, and then Burwell is no longer on the committee. So SB 2 by Senator Creighton. This is that one that we were talking about when it comes to school choice. So as of now, it allows every Texas student to apply for ESA, whether in public school, private school, or homeschool. If the applicants do not exceed the program's capacity, then all students are accepted. If applications exceed the capacity, then 80% of the positions will be filled by lottery by those students that previously attended public school and are either from low-income households or have a disability. Each participating student will receive at least $2,000, or if a family elects to enroll their student in a private school, the student will receive $10,000. $11,500 the student has a disability, which I just want to kind of plug. That's more money than we're getting in the public schools for a student. And the fiscal analysis assumes the cost of the ESA program is $1 billion will be $1 billion in 2027, but it'll balloon to 3.2 billion in 2028, 3.8 in 2029, and then 4.6 in 2030. So if you do the math, you'll see that there's quite a bit of increase in that over from year to year, which is not what we're seeing right now in public education. I can't remember if I added it in this specific slide deck, but we are running on, and I'm sure you guys have heard this as ACPTA, we're running on 2019 numbers. Inflation has gone up quite a bit. So we don't have the exact same spending power. So it's interesting to see that this will continue to rise while public schools have not gotten the increases they need over the last few years. I'll stop for a second. Questions so far? I know this is heavy, y'all.
Yeah, I have a comment real quick. Sorry to be off camera. I'm multitasking, washing dishes here. I'm wondering if, you know, whenever I hear the low income part, I mean, we all know that that's not reflective of what most or even the average person would consider low income. So I'm wondering if the messaging should really shift from using their language to using accurate language around that.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point to bring up. No, Alita, you're not new to kind of the systems, and for the people that kind of are, this is the language they're going to use on the floor as they're giving their messaging. So it'll be really important that we kind of speak up and say, that's not entirely accurate. Thank you so much for bringing that up.
I was going to say, this is Mary Selby. I have a question about, so to go along with what Alita just talked about, it says $160,000 for a family of 4. What is a family of 4 in Texas? Do we have that number? What does a family of 4 average make? Do we have that number? So, because I came from a very small rural town in South Texas, and I can't imagine anyone, even like literally the person with the most income in our city, doesn't have any of that.
I don't know that statistic, but I looked up just last week the median income, and I think it's around 76,000.
Okay, so and yeah,
that was all discussed. I went to the hearing of the committee last week, and it went on. They were supposed to start like at 11. They didn't start till 12:30, and it went on till 8:30, and I stayed pretty much to the end. And all of those numbers were discussed. So I know it's recorded. If you can have time to look at the hearing, you can go through the first 2 hours or more, because it was 2 panels of their witnesses that were all pro vouchers, private school owners, ministers. The only one that was really scary, and Mario, you may address this later, out of the 10 people that they had, quote, testify, and they each had 5 minutes each, and then questions, which were softball questions for most of the committee, our 2, nice committee members, West and Menendez. But the only one that was really scary for me was the lawyer, who's from some group, and said that he had 3 cases, 2 of which the group had won, all the way up to the Supreme Court, about this being legal, using taxpayer money for, vouchers for private schools. Anyway, the numbers, for like a family of 4 and the poverty level and all that was discussed at the hearing.
I actually have a question, because I caught some of the hearing. I didn't catch all of it. I do remember that moment that you're talking about, Judith. And he said, it's been, the Supreme Court has ruled, and he cited the case that yes, we can use public money to fund religious institutions. Was there any talk, or do we know, are there any restrictions to that in SB2, for instance? Like, can a parent decide to give that voucher money to any institution for any religion? Could you know, could someone start a religion or make up a religion and found a school and get that money, or are they restricting it in some way? I know there was some talk about the private school accreditation process, which to me was like, yeah, the private schools pay money to this organization and the organization like gives them a thumbs up, you know. But yeah, anyway,
Someone might be
that was
able
my
to
question, so I don't know.
Someone could probably explain it better, but it was my understanding that they have vendors that are approved, and initially it's just 5. Does anyone else know what I'm talking about? And so it's like
Vendors
there's a
being the
list
schools?
of I believe that was the intention, but they do have
Yeah.
protections around that. Was my
Yeah.
point.
There's like an approved list of private schools that they maintain, I guess.
I think so, but don't quote me.
So yes, that's what I was going to say. There is, but then like who's accrediting that? And if it's such a limited thing, then say I live in a small rural community and that school isn't on the approved list, then where are my options? So there's a list, but who's approving it?
The person,
Yeah.
it's the comptroller who's approving it because it's going to be under them, which is another issue because what do they know about education?
So
Yeah.
you guys,
It's
you
schools.
guys are hitting everything right on, right on the head.
Yeah.
These are all several questions that several advocacy organizations and school districts are asking right now. Judith, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, that's okay. I worked at a private school in Dallas. It was accredited. It was a Jewish day school. And from what I understood from several of the Crichton even said, oh, he was in some city. I don't remember where. I don't think it was Austin. I don't know where his district is. But he went to a Jewish yeshiva, which is an Orthodox school, and they were all, like so happy about this bill or something that he indicated. One of the, I don't know if it was Mendez or somebody else who asked about, well, what if it's a Muslim or a Jewish or a Hindu or whatever? And it seemed like they will be on the list. And private school accreditation is not just, for the gentleman that asked, is not just to sort of pay your money and do things. The private school that I worked at, and I guess it is who you are accredited by, because there's more than one accreditation service, but they have to meet standards similar to public school standards.
And so the vendors are those accreditation agencies?
I don't know if the vendors were the same thing. That wasn't the impression that I got. The vendors may be a different thing because I'd have to go back and look at my notes.
It's not the same thing. Yeah, so private schools all have different accreditation, but based on like if they're a Lutheran school or whatever, like they all have their own accrediting body. The point is that the state wouldn't be doing it.
Right. Yeah. No, they're just going to keep a list, the comptroller, of the schools that somebody, if the parent wants this $10,000 and wants to go to X school, then yes, the comptroller will say, yeah, that's an okay school, but they don't do the accreditation. That was my understanding.
So I do have a little bit of more information that'll hopefully clear a little bit of that up, or at least give you some more information. So we're going to talk a little bit about just school funding in general. If you look at the available state revenue sources for the 89th legislative session, we have about 23.8 billion projected remaining balance after the special sessions, and then 28.5 billion in our rainy day fund, which totals out to $52.3 billion. So again, we have money very similar to the last legislative session. There is money there. That a lot of people are gonna try to take a piece of that pie. And we are in a place where there is quite a bit of budget deficits within school districts. I think there's only one school district as of now that is not in the red that I work with when it comes to budget wise, but they will be next year based off of projections. But we have double digit inflation since 2019. I kind of talked about that COVID funding cliff where we were getting the national monies into our school systems that are now drying up. So we're not going to have that anymore. Of course, enrollment decline in some school districts, which increases pressure from charter schools. increased safety requirements that are not funded, SPED funding for identification of students is very costly. AISD is going through that process right now and has been very costly for AISD. Political pressure of recapture ballooning, providing complications through the comptroller property value study. I'm not going to get into that one because that's a whole nother conversation. And then, of course, inaction by the last legislative session. That's kind of one of the really big ones. Because of all of this, we've seen all the headlines. We've seen school districts talking about they're slowly going broke, teachers saying that they have a lack of safety security, school safety funding, which is going to cause them to cut other things. We've seen it in Austin ISD. We've seen it all across the state. Everybody is worried about their budgets. I don't know if any school district would say we have more than enough budget. I'm going to run through this pretty quickly because I know ACPTA is pretty actively involved in this. We hear the number of how much do schools get per student. We are in the bottom 10% when it comes to per pupil funding. We're about between $4,000 to $5,000 now, dollars below the national average. So do we really get the $14,928 per student like we hear certain politicians say? And the answer is no, we don't. The money that they talk about go through several different places and is distributed through multiple different agencies, which is how they use that $14,928. But really, we're looking about a little over $6,000 per student of actual spending money. These are really the only ways to increase school revenue. We have to increase enrollment or go to or average daily attendance. We need to increase the maintenance operation tax rate if available. Access to specific TEA programs through TIA, additional school days throughout the year, mentor allotment, Texas partnership agreements, high quality instructional materials, rural pathways. These are all how much we're spending annually. We really need to kind of reevaluate like what we're doing. I know a representative recently told me, I won't say who because they haven't quite said anything out loud yet. A representative I spoke to recently told me that they're looking at a way that we can kind of start from scratch and really look at where's the money going to and how can we make sure that's distributed correctly. So I'm kind of excited about that. I'm going to keep that very vague for right now until that person comes out. But they're on our side. I'll say that.
I do have a question about this one. So it sounded like, you started with the state of the state, and it sounded like the governor is interested or is open to increasing the money in number 3 here in these kind of special programs that may or may not get the money to the right place. But I didn't hear, and I don't know, is there openness or any kind of legislative movement on that increasing the basic allotment, or just changing that kind of formula that increases the discretion that the schools have? Or is it all, hey, we'll give you a little bit more money for like a mentor program or a one of these
from the governor? No, or at least he hasn't said anything yet. I am very sure that we will see a few bills that touch base on that. We did see quite a few bills touch base on that last legislative session. Had one in particular that I'm thinking about go through the House, got passed, went to the committee, had a bunch of stuff tacked on like vouchers, and then died. So we're gonna have to kind of see where that goes. As far, like I said, as far as these first 60 days and state of the state address, no, unfortunately. So I kind of talked about that $14,928. What's all included in that? It's dollars spent by entities other than ISDs and charter schools. So like Wyndham schools, regional service centers, state and federal vendors, TA administrative costs. So they do talk about some of that money for students within that money that's not going to students. Dollars passed through ISDs to TRS through on behalf payments. Dollars generated to repay bonded debts through INS taxes or through state and INS assistance. Also federal ESSER dollars that we'll know are starting to dry up. And then federal free lunch funding, which now that I said it out loud, with everything going on nationally, that'll be interesting as well. So how do you talk to your community about school funding? State funding for a classroom has remained flat. I'm not gonna have us watch the video because, again, I know ACPTA is very actively involved, and a lot of you know this. If not, I'll make sure that Daphne links this video later for you guys to watch. But it's a really great video on how we get our funding. COVID-19 dollars were temporary, but students' academic growth issue still persists. So it's that cliff fall, that ESSER fund cliff fall that we said. The state helps fund less than 6% of facilities, or funding for facilities. And only the legislature sets the per student funding amount, not the school boards and not school districts. So we need to make sure that we focus as we're talking to people about what can we do, who should we talk to. It has to be at the state level. A lot of people will say, and again, I don't see this as much from some of our allies here in Austin, but people will go after their school boards and be like, you just don't want to help. And that's not the case, the majority of the time, almost, or any of the time from what I've seen. State savings and foundation school programs due to local district property growth was 8.4 billion in 22-23. We really need to get that reinvested back into our public schools. And then we always talk about, what does fully funding really means when it comes to Texas schools. So what in the current context is, do schools have the same purchasing powers as 2019-2020 school year? The answer is no. We know that we have not had an increase in allotment to adjust for inflation. Inflation adjusting funding is down 9.8 billion. And what should fully funding mean? Currently, Texas ranks 46. So like I said, we're between $4,000 and $5,000 below the national average in per student spending. Sorry, 1 second. Why is this not? So here are some of our policy recommendations for school funding. Increase state funding for public school students and education programs with a particular focus on raising teacher pay. And we have to implement an automatic annual adjustment to the basic allotments. Inflation is going to continue to increase. We have to make sure we're increasing funding as we go through this. And reinvest state savings due to local school district property value growth back into public schools. I'm going to talk about teacher workforce really quickly, preaching to the choir again. But we do have the highest level of teacher dissatisfaction in decades, according to our sister foundation, Charles Butt Foundation's Texas 2024 poll. Then 2024, about 78 teachers considered leaving the classroom. How much are they underpaid? This map gives you kind of an idea of where we're at when it comes to, the average national salary. We're about 23.4% below the national average when it comes to how much we're paying our teachers. This gives you kind of a medium based off areas within Texas. 77% of teachers do not feel they are paid a livable wage. Again, preaching to the choir, so I'm not going to harp on this too much unless you guys have a question regarding it. And teachers say on average now Texas teachers on average now earn more than $9,000 less than the national average, while Texas provides more than $5,000 less per student in school funding than the national average. Kind of said that a few times. Our poll also showed that 52% of Texas teachers work a second job. And then 89% of those teachers who are working a second job are working it during the school year. I'll add quickly that yesterday I took six teachers from 3 different school districts to the Capitol to meet with legislators. And out of the 6, I think 3 of them mentioned side jobs that they have in addition to teaching. One teacher, I think, had 4 different jobs, like 3 additional side jobs. As teachers struggle and make ends meet and leave the classroom to join other sectors, it's becoming harder to bring them back and harder to kind of get more people who are going to come into this profession. And there has been a shift away from teacher certification. Nearly 34% of all new hires are uncertified. So this is that, told you we're going to come back to uncertified teachers. Uncertified teachers made up over 80% of new hires in 40 counties within Texas. 72% of uncertified teachers have no prior experience working in Texas public schools. And if you didn't know, you can join a program and get a job, so you're earning your certification while you're on the job. I was an instructional coach my last few years of teaching. I had quite a few teachers that were in that boat, and it was extremely hard to get them up to speed as we were trying to service our students. Nearly 1 in 5 uncertified new teachers do not hold a bachelor's degree. And students with new and uncertified teachers perform significantly worse in reading and math, unless the teacher has previous experience working in Texas public schools. And I will say I've personally seen that this affects, our high, most vulnerable populations, because it's kind of a revolving door of teachers, unfortunately, because of all the things that they have on their plates, and the low pay. This will show you kind of the rise of uncertified teachers over the years. As you can see, almost 10 years ago, we were at 6.8%, and we've gone up tremendously to 33.8%. And this is data that we got from the TEA. So here it is, the thing that we have all been kind of, I think, waiting for, right? Overwhelmingly, Raise Your Hand Texas continues to believe vouchers are bad policy for Texas. They're not the solution for public education. Some examples of public school choice. Students and families have a myriad of school options. We see neighborhood schools, we see magnet programs, academies, specialty campuses, early childhood high schools, open enrollment districts, open enrollment campuses, and even charter schools. So even without a voucher program, students still have, or parents still have choice. There are lots of ways for students to get the needs that they need met. What we've seen in other states with one or more voucher program is a little bit alarming. 12 states have at least one private school choice program that universally accessible to K through 12. So not a lot of them are universal. Some of the headlines we've seen is, seeing things about fraud. I know somebody, I think it was Judith that was talking about, that money piece and how it's distributed, who gets it. Iowa Mom says school vouchers doesn't offset tuition costs. We know that not every private school is going to be the exact cost of this voucher. So are we really helping our most vulnerable students if their parents are going to have to fork up the other $5,000-$10,000 for the school year? My parents wouldn't have been able to.
I think too. The way I'm interpreting that one too, if you go back, they're talking about tuition increases too. So I think what they're implying there is private school. Yeah, it says private school tuition hikes. So basically, hey, the voucher programs passes, and private schools know you've got $10,000 extra dollars, or families do.
Yeah,
and you kind of can't blame them for raising their rates.
Yeah, and one thing I've heard as well is again, this is Mario talking. One thing I've heard is a bunch of new, and someone you guys mentioned it earlier, a bunch of new private schools popping up that just so happen to be the exact cost of a voucher, right? So something to kind of be wary of and to think about as we move forward, as Texas considers this and if they pass it into law.
Mario, just anecdotally, one of our grandparents for public schools volunteers down in Victoria was telling me that she was talking to folks from a couple of Catholic schools, and they said, yeah, we're going to raise our tuition when the voucher passes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
I'm sorry, Mario.
No, go for
it. Y'all really should watch a little bit of this horrible committee hearing. These 10 people they had, testifying. One of them, or more than one of them, said, well, our school tuition is $8,000 or, $9,000 or whatever. So there are schools that, they can go to. There were, I don't know, most of them were Christian schools. There were 2 or 3 that were pastors or ministers who testified and quoted scripture. I mean, the whole thing was just, just really scary.
So it looks like Daphne said that ACPTA has pulled out a number of compelling testimony videos from the Senate hearing, and she linked that on there for you guys. So good job,
Oh,
ACPTA.
great.
Yeah.
Good.
Trisha did that for us. We don't actually have the invited testimony, I don't think, on there. She pulled out like compelling messages against vouchers. I do, and I don't know if this has been mentioned yet, but I really don't think he has the votes. And we have to be careful of that because the people that we think are probably not supportive of this that he brought on are not in our area, and they may actually be very offended by Austinites calling them, even if we do like a love campaign. So we're kind of staying away from this for now, but I think that we should be aware that we are going to love these people up when it's time, and that we have to persuade them that their schools are more important than their billionaire donors who got them elected. But we'll talk about all that. I get a lot of questions. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I get a lot of people saying, let us reach out to these rural people. Let us reach out. And honestly, it could do us a lot of harm if we are not really careful with how we do that. So I'm going to say it again. And Mario, I didn't mean to step on you, but
no, you're fine.
Be really careful about reaching out right now. It is a very sensitive time, and people are making big political decisions that they have a huge impact on them. We don't want some politician who might be on our side to say, leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with this. I'm not going to do it. And so back to you, Mario.
Yeah. Daphne, I would agree with everything you just said about not reaching out, but I am much more pessimistic about this not passing. Look what has just happened there was a very good piece today about the Paxton Cornyn showdown coming up, and about how Cornyn, no matter how much he tries to appease the mega, Republicans, he's going to lose. And I think they're all afraid. I don't think we're going to win this one, but I think we can make as much noise as we can to, show that people are out here watching and knowing what's going on.
I agree.
I think it'll be important to remember, like, I hate to be cliche about it, but hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. So, as you guys are moving through this advocacy journey, for this specifically, you need to be strategic, as Daphne said, but also what are your contingency plans? How do we react? How do we mobilize as we go through the process before, during, and after, right?
Mm-hmm.
So looking at some of the things that, we've seen in other states that, Texas really needs to learn from before they decide to vote on this, I think is, public school students who use vouchers don't usually stay in voucher programs long-term and return to public schools. We've also seen that vouchers are just a subsidy for high-income families. We've seen, if you just kind of Google, the statistics are like above 75% of vouchers that have been used in other states were for people who were already in voucher school programs. We really look at the fiscal consequences for public schools because it'll be devastating for Texas. As we saw, that number increased, by the billions as we continued over the years for the projections. I just talked about that. If we look at Florida, 61% of students in the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Program stayed for less than 2 years. In Arizona, it's Universal School Voucher Program, that was estimated to cost only $65 million, costs over 700 million. So just a couple of examples of what I just talked about when it comes to who stays and how much money it's going to cost the state. So this is just something that we pulled for voucher tax credits based off family income, like who are the people that are using them. As I said, overwhelmingly it's people who were already in high income families. Back to kind of like our Charles Butt Foundation poll. This one's from 2023, but Texas strongly favored transparency and equal access to taxpayer dollars for education. And I promise I'm starting to wrap things up. What to expect is legislative session, which is, we're already seeing it. Debate over the cost and scale of the voucher program, testing accountability, eligibility requirements, And there's a plethora of other questions that now I'm thinking about that, are going to be need to be answered for people to be okay with any kind of voucher program, or are going to want answered. Additional property tax relief, business versus residential, additional M&O buyout, ban on taxpayer funded lobbying, more restrictive bond elections. That's going to be a really interesting one. Culture issues like library books, curriculum, DEI programs are definitely going to be something that we're going to be looking at during this legislative session. Cell phone bans in public schools. I went into an office yesterday with these teachers, and one office told me that is their number one priority this session is banning cell phones in schools. I thought that was very interesting. And then funding for specific programs. But we'll have to make a clear, substantial increase to the basic allotment for like TIA, early literacy incentives, and so on. So I just gave you guys a ton of information, but it's not all doom and gloom. There's still things that we can do. And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir with ACPTA, but I love showing this slide with everybody, especially some of our newer advocates, and just feeling overwhelmed and like, what do I do? How can I make a difference? Where do I start? This is a quick, easy breakdown, and feel free to screenshot this slide and use it as you feel, remake it or whatever. But I love using this with people to tell them how they can be advocates without spending hours and hours and hours of their time and still make a difference. So going from 1 minute just sharing a legislative alert. If you're not part of Raise Your Hand Texas legislative alerts, I recommend for you to go to our website and get our emails. I really love our emails because they're called Across the Lawn. They're really easy to read. They give you 4 things to know about what's happening in public education right now and what's one actionable item that you can do. It usually doesn't take very long either. Or if they really want to get kind of in the nitty gritty, they can write letters. They can go testify. If you know someone who's trying to go testify, I can definitely kind of help them walk them through that process as well. Other than that, I will try to answer questions if I have the knowledge.
Mark, I got a quick question for you. I just had a thought about your go back a page or two when the things that are going to be discussed, testing and accountability. So I feel like one of the I don't think majority of Texans are following this, and the majority of Texans who have kids in schools obviously have them in Texas public schools. And I think one of the things about it that seems the most unfair is that students in public schools, or one of the things that private schools talk about is how they have all this time to read, longer books or do these different programs and all this experiential stuff because they're not teaching to a standardized test, but they're not subject to that. And the deal, as I've understood it, has been, okay, well, they don't take public money, so they don't get held accountable in the same way that a public school does. So maybe that seems fair to me. But then once you take the public money, but then you're not held accountable, that seems really unfair to me. And I do think that would seem really unfair across the spectrum to Texans, regardless of their political.
Absolutely. And that's come up quite a few times from advocates that I've talked to all over, not just actually me, but some of the other regional advocacy directors. That's definitely something that a lot of people are bringing up. I've heard legislators talk about, that accountability piece of using public funds for private schools. Like how do we make sure, we harp so much on making sure that we're spending our dollars correctly in public schools. What is going to be that oversight? How is that going to look like in that private sector if there is a voucher? But yeah, you're right on it. I think that's a question that they need to answer that they quite haven't done yet.
And even in that committee meeting, I did catch some testimony from the people they had invited, right? The private school people, and they were there. They kind of, in my mind, had a little bit of gumption there to say like, well, we like this SB2, but we're here to make sure that you don't put any sort of basically testing standards on us or give us any restrictions on this. Which I think that's asking quite a bit of Texas taxpayers, right? Of give us this money with no zero strings attached, you know. And I think
Yeah.
that's clear. I think that's something that everybody can understand is not really fair.
Well,
And
it,
additionally, I think, sorry,
I
I'll
was just
say,
gonna say it skews the outcomes as well, because if you're able to pick who you accept, you know, they can pick the best and brightest, no
Sure.
children with special needs. And so even if they did evaluate them, it wouldn't be a fair representation of what the school is providing, right?
or have
So
students with special needs, but not necessarily have to follow, you know, their IEPs, not legally bound to services. That's exactly what I was going to say too.
Are you saying that in school choice, parents can actually choose the school? Is that what you're saying? That the school, for instance, can reject the you know, the private school could not accept the kid?
yes, that's the case.
I was actually thinking about that earlier today, and I thought, what? Because my husband calls me dark woke. You know, like if somebody's doing something really obnoxious, then I like egg them on, instead of, you know, kind of de-escalate. So I know Lori's laughing. Um, but I bring that up because when they talk about these things, you know, like uh, um you know, not having the standardized tests and all of that kind of stuff. Charter schools already can choose, right? They can release students for minor infractions, and yet their outcomes are not better than the public schools. And so I do think, you know, the standardized tests, nobody should have to take them if it were up to me. But I do understand that, like, as a private school, they're not going to follow our TEKS. They're not going to follow our curriculum. They're there because they're not interested in our curriculum. And so the idea that they could give some tests that would ensure that their children were keeping up with the public school kids, you know, is probably unrealistic and absolutely something that we should be asking about. The TRS thing, I think, is super important. The teacher retirement system, very, very important. It said in the fiscal notes for SB2 that would destabilize that system. In some districts, the schools are the only major employer. They're the only people who are getting a living wage. And they're not really getting a living wage when you start looking at teacher payout in those districts or in those areas. And so they're very sensitive about their teachers. And so centering teachers, even though we have seen teachers get thrown under the bus for, you know, generations now, I think it's really important that we use their language against them. There's no freedom when you don't get to choose. That's not a choice. And I also do think it's really important that people understand you lose your voice. We talked about this before. People have mentioned this, but at you know, here in Austin, we get to choose, we get to elect our board members, we get to sit on district councils, we get to sit on campus councils, we get to have a voice. But when I go to a private school, they don't want to hear it, right? They're there because they don't really want to have people telling them what to do. And that's even more so when you talk about religious schools who actually, you know, are there with a purpose. And you know, I'm not going to get into that because I love all these schools. Do your own thing. But as a private citizen, I have a dyslexic kid. I could take him to a private school, $42,000 for him to have his dyslexia remediated. And that coupon that I would get from the state would give me an extra, you know, 10,000, 12,000, still $30,000 is more than I can afford, y'all. I don't know who can afford that. But I mean, it seems so out of reach and it seems so ridiculous that this is being used as a tool when in fact, this idea of choice is eliminating our voice. And what empowerment is for parents is really our voice. It's having a say in our education.
Yeah.
I'm not an educator, but I want to be able to know that the people I'm electing to run the school are educators, you know? And so anyway, I think it's important that we talk about that.
Um,
I have a question, just in consideration to like, outcomes, I guess. Has there been any kind of like outreach or like discussion with top universities in Texas? Like, are we talking to Rice? Are we talking to UT? And, you know, saying, hey, like, you know, what is this going to do? Are they pro? I don't get the feeling that if we have like that many more kids coming through private schools that don't have oversight, are parents prepared for their kids to not get into their schools of choice that are getting more and more difficult? Like, is that another way to kind of discuss this with parents or with even with legislators? Like, is like looking into the outcomes, right?
That's not
I know
really,
several private schools where it's like, you're a shoo-in if you went to certain ones, right? But then there are also a lot where it's like, man, this kid came out barely able to read. Like, we're not taking any of these kids.
that's not, pardon me for interrupting, but that's not really a question. 94% of Texas children go to public schools. This only is going to affect, out of 5.5 million students that we have in public schools right now in Texas, this is only going to affect about 100,000 students. So we're talking about a very small percentage. In this country, this has not changed for 30 years or more. Between 9 and 11% of children go to private schools nationwide, except for New York City, which is up to 18%. Still means 80% of their children go to public schools. But this is the way it is across the country. This is going to affect such a small percentage of students in this state that that's not really going to be an issue, I don't think, about college. The more important issue that we saw this in Dallas when charter schools started a few, 10 years back or whenever it was. The issue was charter schools, private schools are not required to follow IDEA regulations. And this came up at the hearing last week. They have a loophole that says if the school feels they cannot offer the services the child needs, then they can refuse to accept the child. And that's their loophole. And they can say that's how they can pick and choose. And this came up when charter schools started in Dallas, because so many parents were saying it makes the public schools the, quote, pardon the expression, dumping ground for all the children with special needs, whether it's dyslexia or some kind of physical or mental disability. I mean, those children will never get to go to private schools except like the $40,000 ones. There's two in Dallas, one that takes ADD kids and one that takes kids with some other learning disability, but they are like $40,000 a year. Yeah. The only other advantage, and this I have to investigate more, but I've worked at a private school and at the public schools, that has not come up in this discussion is class size. The advantage of private schools that I have seen is none of them have classes that are more than 14 students in a class. They did away more or less with the 22-1 rule, even though it says on the website for the teachers union that that's still in effect. I know what it happened in Dallas after 25 years of having that rule, and we had 30 children in kindergarten classes. That was about the average. In the middle school where I taught, we couldn't get enough desks, because this doesn't apply to anything over third grade or second grade. It was an old school building. We couldn't get enough desks in a classroom for all the students that were supposed to be in that class. Private schools and charter schools don't have that problem.
Right. It's not a magic bullet. I love the commentary. In the interest of people's time, I'm gonna keep moving. But thank you very much, Judith. I absolutely appreciate your input. Are there any other questions? This is all really good discussion. I'm gonna throw out a couple of things there. Raise Your Hand Texas has a fantastic website. I did link the videos. They do a wonderful job of explaining what's going on. Mario just posted his information in the chat, and I appreciate that. I just realized we still have Mario pinned, and we may not need to. Sorry about that, Mario. Keeping you on the spot. Okay. Whoops. Sorry, you guys, I'm having trouble. Can somebody help me get, okay. Let me bring Mario back up because I'm recording on mine. Okay, we're going back to you, Mario. Sorry, I just want to make sure that we have somebody on the screen. So yes, Mario, Raise Your Hand Texas, wonderful resource. Absolutely get their newsletter, and it's like I forget, but it's 3 things you can do, 1 thing you can know, something like that, or 1 thing you can do and 3 things you can know. Very helpful. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot. This is a lot. And so it's a lot to know. It's a lot to keep up with. I know it's exhausting for me, and this is sort of all I do, but do not feel bad if you don't fully understand everything that's being talked about. And also make sure before you kind of go off and kind of do advocacy on your own, that you really are well versed in this stuff, because it can get very confusing out there as we try to sort things out. There are organizations that are very well versed in this, who have professionals who are getting paid. I'm just a volunteer. I lean heavily on organizations like Raise Your Hand Texas. So we have on our website, we have a wonderful website now, austincouncilpta.org/advocacy. We have a list there of partner organizations where they're always kind of coming and going. We've lost a few this session. There are a few that we're adding on. We also have a list of our legislative priorities, and we're filling that out with some volunteers, filling out that information to answer your questions about vouchers and school funding and how this applies to our special education and school security and our LGBTQ kids, all of those things. So we're working on filling that out. This session came in like a freight train. Generally, we have more time to prepare. So I appreciate everybody who showed up today to get this information, because it is in preparation of the legislative session, which normally doesn't become a public kind of enterprise until end of February, March, but became very public with these governor's priorities very early. And so we have been scrambling to prepare information for you guys. If you are here as a member of my Google group, please keep monitoring that. We're sending out really good information and having great conversations. Please follow that. If you're not a member of that Google group, you can find that information on the website. I do encourage you. Action is the antidote to anxiety, y'all. And so showing up, making phone calls, super easy things to do. As Mario showed that list, there are a lot of really simple ways to get involved. We have Nori, who's on the list, is a rock star. She was testified at the Senate hearing, along with 6 or 7 other ACPTA and grandparents for public education and other advocates who showed up to testify. We've got a lot of those videos on the website, but Nori took her testimony a step further and turned it into a letter to the editor. A really, really, really wonderful. Nori, if you could post that, I would love people to see that.
Yes, and I didn't get to testify. I turned it, remember, I had to leave. So I turned it in, and it's been published in several newspapers, which is exciting. So yeah. I'll post it. Yes.
Thank you. So that is something, I mean, literally you could take your thoughts, put it into ChatGPT, let it massage it into an op-ed, and then bring it back out and you edit it and massage it yourself again. Please do not use an original ChatGPT script, because it kind of shows. But use that, massage it, and submit it to these newspapers. And if you have a connection, so on our website, you'll see access to our resources page. ACPTA has a resource folder that's available to all advocates, and it includes a lot of information, a lot of folders to help advocates, find ways to engage and find ways to help their communities engage. On that, we actually have a link we have a folder for writing letters to the editor. It's got a template that's really easy to use. We also have a really robust spreadsheet that was put together by 3 or 4 of us, our organizations, a few years ago. So it is kind of old, but so check the information, go to the website and make sure that the information is updated. But please spread the word. Those letters to the editor get spread everywhere. I probably had 6 of them cross my desk this weekend from people who had, just got it in the Amarillo paper or whatever. And if you look at that list and you see a small town paper that you have a connection to, you have a cousin there, or somebody who was a teacher there, or you dated a guy who went to church there, make that connection and they will publish your paper, your letters, because Newspapers are looking for commentary right now. So I wanted to throw that out. That is a very powerful way to engage. But if you can't do that, if you don't have that kind of time or feel confident, all you have to do is call. And I'm begging you to call. Call your local representatives right now. Honestly, call your federal representatives right now. It's hard to even concentrate on what's happening in Texas with the stuff that's happening in the rest of our country. But that is your voice. That is a very powerful tool. Do not discount it. Model it for your friends. Call in front of your family and say, hey, I'm talking to my representative's office right now, and show how easy it is. There are scripts everywhere. We have scripts everywhere. I'm not really sure where we have them, honestly, how publicly you can get it, but in our advocacy resource folder, if somebody could put that link on, that would be awesome, because y'all, it's public, you have access to it, and we've got all the tools so that you can be an effective advocate. So I just want to thank Mario for his time. I have so much deep appreciation for people who have been in this advocacy world for a while and like keep going and every year come up with new plans. And it is a tough gig, but we together, Raise Your Hand Texas, Austin Council of PTAs, and 100, well, not 100, but a dozen other advocacy organizations here in Austin, Pastors for Public Education, Grandparents for Public Schools. We have been keeping the worst from happening in our schools, and we will keep keeping the worst from happening in our schools, including vouchers. If you guys help me by stepping up and engaging. Again, Our House Open House, February 17th. That's a school holiday, so 1 to 4 drop in. Please come down to the Capitol. This is your opportunity to get comfortable parking, getting in, going through security, walking around. We're going to be doing scavenger hunts and talking about advocacy. We're going to be sending you to your representatives' offices with postcards that you've written with your children, hopefully. So bring your children. Super important day. Please show up. Please come. And please, you'll see how easy it is. And once you do it once, honestly, you'll get the bug and you'll want to do it again. Then February 24th, actually February 22nd, which is a Saturday, there's a Save Our Schools rally. I highly encourage you guys to attend. That's down at the Capitol, and I think it's at 11. Then on February 24th is our ACPTA rally day. If you're coming for, it's an all-day thing from 9 to 3. From 9:30 to 11, there'll be caucuses. So student caucuses, adult caucuses, talking about the issues, talking about kind of where people are coming from. And the student caucus will be super informative because students will be talking to students. It's very powerful and I love it. From 11:30 to 12 is the actual rally. Get there early. That'll be at the Capitol steps. That's where we need the general public to come support our schools and say, hey, enough. We want you to fund our schools. And then from 1 to 3, we actually have rooms where we have representatives rolling through. You are welcome to join the ACPTA. I encourage you to RSVP. So if somebody else could also put in the RSVP link for Rally Day, and if you could share that around, share it with your neighborhood group, share it with your booster group, share it with the sponsors at your school. We want everybody to know that we need people to show up to support public education on February 24th. And then that kicks off really a lot of activities that'll happen. There will be hearings in the Senate and the House throughout the session, and we're going to be asking people to come down, raise their voices, call representatives with scripts or messaging that we give them so that we have a unified voice. And in Cedar Park, I will actually, Judith, I'll be speaking at that. I'm on the panel talking about vouchers at that meeting in Cedar Park. And we will keep trying to get links up here in the chat so you guys have access to all this information. So thank you so much. Mario, thank you. As always, we love you. Any one last question? Does anybody have one last thought for Mario? Mario, you have one last thought for us.
Yeah, just remembered, that this is a marathon, not a sprint, and it is a team sport. It takes everybody, to kind of do their part, and advocacy doesn't have to be all time consuming unless you want it to be. There's lots of little things that you can do to move the needle forward. So just remember that, and I'm here for whatever you guys need.
Thank you. And to Mario's point, yep, y'all nap, eat your snacks, take care of yourselves, find things you're passionate about, and disengage, momentarily when you need to, because it is a long haul. And we appreciate you all. Thank you so much for joining the Austin Council of PTAs and Mario Pena from Raise Your Hand Texas. This has been a very informative conversation, and we will post this on our YouTube page, and this information that he shared will be available to share with everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.